Yeah, so a few things that came up. I'm actually really thankful for this period of time here because, of course, whenever you talk about something, you think about other things or other people inspire you on different pieces. One of the things that I was really appreciative of that Lydia brought up with the budgeting of pieces. I think it's important to invest properly for these vegetation on these projects. I think what I had, John Negley and I from the Soil and Water District, we used to patch these things together. Like look, we're doing like 8 projects this year, and we got all the materials, and we're out there on Saturdays waiting for crews to come out and doing it on the cheap. It really does pay to invest in these things appropriately and pay for them. Use a grant, making sure that back end, it's a very significant piece of the project. I'm not sure I still fund those appropriately, invest properly. Opportunity. Kristen was talking about these opportunities, planning for opportunities. Absolutely, being ready for when people are ready to do that. I remember as a part of this, we did this kind of really basic analysis of the land uses along all the streams that fed the state parks, and our theory was, well, there's a lot of water quality issues in those state parks with swimming and other things, and we did mailings to every landowner to say, hey, do you want to do planting? And then we brought them in and talked about that, and we did some really great projects with that. The one thing that, the third point, and probably my most important point on this too, is being ready for those opportunities, investing in them appropriately, but not forgetting about the really, I think, most important piece is if we're really going to make some strides on this, we really need to think seriously about regulatory options. I mean, we can do little pieces here and there, but, and this is a point that Angel maybe remind me of that too, really, of the 2,000 miles in this county, a lot of times we don't know what it's got till it's gone. We have these embarrassment or riches of really great buffers, and we got to do a better job protecting that so that companies from the outside can't come and take these things down that are providing great service to us. So I talked to a few folks at the break from municipalities, but we need to think creatively about what are the obstacles to having some sort of regulation at the local level for protecting these high-functioning natural infrastructure in our county.
Scott really said it all. Honestly, I mean, you need to budget correctly. And then if, from our standpoint in the coalition, to get practices on the ground, landowners come to us wanting X, Y, and Z, and they have a stream and it's not buffered. That's leverage right there, I guess, is the last point that I'll make. Don't sacrifice, get that buffer. You can pay for whatever else you need to pay for them, but get the buffer, get the width you want, do the right thing for the stream. That's all I'll say.
So now, am I on? Now open up the questions, and I'm going to make sure you use the mic because we are recording this so that planning boards in the future can use this. But I saw Sam's hand first, so I'll come to you.
You guys mentioned the Army Corps of Engineers. Has somebody, or would somebody please make sure they know the condition of the streams in our county, state, whatever? They all need dredging, cleaning out, whatever. And that was evident in the most recent flood there for Halloween. I had a creek in my farm over 20 years, never changed, and it just made great big gouges, and I mean, it was just terrible. The damage was just terrible. Just wanted to make sure somebody makes them aware how bad they are. Thank you.
I guess my only response there would be, they see our permits and what goes through. I hear of times, and I do a lot of different site visits, and people will say, well, Army Corps came in and did this, or Army Corps or DEC came in and did this, and then that's not gonna happen, now. I don't think any agency is going to come in and do stream work, at this point. And it depends on what's going on. It's definitely important to take a look at the stream, see what it's doing. Does it necessarily need, material taken out? Is that going to help things, or is it going to, make things worse? So we really need to look at that. We really need to look at what's going on there. Can we see what might have caused that? And then think about, a plan from there. And I mean, I work with a lot of different people, and funding is another side of this, and what can the landowner pay for it if it's a private landowner, or the town, or do we wait for funds? A lot of the projects I just showed you, I mean, it was years of waiting for funds.
I think we've also seen these, in the last half dozen years, particularly these increased micro events in parts of our county where we've just taken on several inches of rain in a short amount of period, and that's put some significant burden on local landowners and municipalities and their budgets too. And so a lot of it's just these overwhelming quick systems that really are complicated from debris and all sorts of factors too. So I've heard that quite a bit.
You probably didn't have volunteers running those giant backhoes when you did that last project you showed. What was the cost of that project? It looked like a really expensive project.
So it depends on who's doing the work. So the project that I showed you on Salmon Creek, the town did the work, the town highway. So the cost of the project was just the equipment rental and the rock that we used on site. So not bidding it out, I can't tell you what it would have been if a contractor did it. So it varies. I have other projects, but every stream project is so unique. It's hard to compare one to the other because some will be, have a lot of structure in the stream. Some won't. Some will have riprap. So it just varies so much. It's hard to compare. But yes, we do bid out projects, for contractors, and then if the town is able to do the work and is willing to work with us, we do have an engineer, and then I'm on site every day and do a lot of the survey and the layout. So if they're willing to work with us and they're open to that, then we'll work with the town.
And just Tom, one more point. Sorry, Reggie. These can be expensive projects, in my experience, and some we worked with, and they're complicated and sometimes work well, sometimes don't. My hope is we're going to move more toward this less need for those types of projects if we can, have this model of making room for systems to move. But, we have some damaged systems that need repair, but that's part of the reason why we need to invest in those protection and, regulation, so we don't have to engineer that. I mean, there's still going to be some of those cases, but hopefully we'll reduce those.
About the kinds of things you're planting, and I assume you're thinking of using native species and native bushes and so forth. And so I would ask a couple of things. One, is it difficult to obtain those? And the other thing is, are you trying to think ahead in terms of the pests that we're going to be facing soon, in terms of some species maybe coming into greater risk, that sort of thing? Just curious.
Yes. Yeah, we definitely consider, we try to exclusively use native species. Most of the material, all of the material that we obtain, the plant material, is locally sourced. And the other question about the pests, we definitely consider that 100%, and we will stop planting. There's tools online we can use to see where the hemlock woody adelgid is, where particular species are, what is susceptible, and there's also some climate resiliency and climate change type information out there and modeling that we can use to help us best prepare with the types of species that we will plant for the future. The types of species community changes that we were seeing, we can accommodate for that using those tools. Yep.
Scott, you mentioned the need for more regulations, and the state of Vermont recently passed a statewide law of requiring stream buffers and nutrient management plans and certain practices by every farmer in the state of Vermont. And we're still relying on these voluntary participations and a lot of tax dollars spent in the voluntary programs on these measures. What's the conversation in New York State for getting some statewide regulations, especially with our HABs problem?
Yeah, it's real. I mean, in terms of thinking beyond, hey, convince you to do it type thing. It's, there's so many great things that I think we learned from our surrounding states and states throughout the country. The reality is we have a very different state in terms of its regulatory function and local land use authority, and also just style of planning and pride in the local level, which is really great in some regards, but this is one regard that's not that great. The great thing is there can be different approaches, and I think there are some good examples. We have a few locally, but we really need to come at this from our angles. And I think part of this is, too, in this advancing this as a protection mechanism kind of connects with this issue of, like, we are dealing with higher precipitation events. Let's figure out ways, and we do have changing floodplains. This is something that FEMA's working on the updates of maps right now, which I'm quite confident we'll see much larger floodplains in our county. Coupling the stream, the water quality benefits and wildlife benefits of buffers with that very real floodplain protection is, I think, a part of where we're going to go, where we need to go. And I think that looking for those mutual benefits is going to be part of that. But I mean, it's a frank conversation that, the reality is in our area, it's much different than the West, of course, and the history and how we've developed around our waterfronts, which is met with a lot of complexity. So I honestly have not heard anything at the state level that has, they're definitely funding more projects in creative ways, but nothing that's a comprehensive blanket type of protection. I think the only thing we might have is connected with the flooding piece, but that can make a compelling argument at the local level, in my opinion.
Well, it's our tax dollars.
That's right. It's investment, long-term investment.
Okay, go ahead. Question to Lydia. It looked as if quite a lot of land that you had pictures of was fairly degraded, probably nutrient poor. Do you ever use fertilizer, compost, manure when you plant these to get them established because the land is so impoverished?
I have used fertilizer tabs a couple times, but most often, no, we do not use any fertilizer. But I really liked how Angel was using a lot of compost on her projects. I might try to pick some of that up. And it is definitely a component that maybe we'll start adding to future projects. But just to kind of put some of my projects into context, getting riparian forest buffers on private farmland is very, very difficult. So getting landowner approval just for the practice and then any of their involvement from that point forward is very minimal, and spreading some type of fertilizer or doing some type of practice like that prior to planting might be even cumbersome to getting the project on the ground in the first place, just because it could be such a heavy lift, and it's something that I personally couldn't be capable of doing. I would need the landowner's help, and typically they aren't very engaged in these projects.
So on that note of how we can get more people to actually care about protecting this, I'm curious if you've worked with or of any third-party collaborations, like nonprofits who care about a certain aspect of our environment, or even just a shared interest among landowners, for example, people who care about fish, certain native fish populations. They have an interest in protecting streams. Yeah, so I'm curious if you've worked with any organizations like that, or maybe if we can all brainstorm other nonprofits who aren't here today in this conversation that maybe could be a part of it.
From my end of things, yeah. Yep, we've definitely worked with a lot of third parties. Academic institutions typically have some interest in either putting buffers on their properties or volunteering their students to help us. Finger Lakes Land Trust has been a great advocate for the work that we do along streamside properties, and either purchasing land, putting easements on land, but making sure that if they put an easement on or they purchase the property, that the riparian area is restored. And then, Trout Unlimited has been mildly engaged. I would say they should definitely be at the table more. There's a whole host of partners that we work with to try to engage more landowners, at least from my end. I don't know if you guys want
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case, and I think it's a great player to have, and it speaks to that multi-benefit. Yeah, in our area, the Finger Lakes Land Trust has been a great advocate for these multi-benefits. In the kind of conservation sports kind of community, like fishing and wildlife, there's a great hunting program they have too that helps to, I think, further support the certainly management of deer, but also that kind of multi-use piece. I think another aspect that we should be thinking more about, there is some of the recreation community in terms of trails. I mean, there's a lot of projects where we've been able to make a case for formalized protection on, for example, the Finger Lakes Trail that also has a great stream protection. And then, we're going to make sure that nothing near the stream or trail is harvested, for example. But so there's some of those, and look around the room here too. I mean, municipalities. I mean, I wouldn't call them a third party, but I think they're a very active player that have done some pretty creative things and could do more too. And higher ed too. All the land that higher ed has in our county and throughout upstate New York, that's another big player too.
Yeah. I think there needs to be significantly more collaboration, though. In this upper Susquehanna watershed, we have a coalition that's led by soil and water conservation districts, and our most typical clientele is agricultural landowners, right? They should not be the only ones bearing the burden of our riparian forest buffer implementation goals. We need all landowners at the table. We have a lot of absentee landowners. Can we get a hold of them? How do we get a hold of them? That type of targeting just hasn't really occurred, but it should. Do something else.
Yeah, and just the notation on the ag community too. I mean, I think they're often seen as very, very anti-buffer, and that is in some cases. I like some landowners, but there are some farmers that I've worked with that have been great advocates and want to really showcase and take care of these areas and see them as mutually beneficial to their operations. So I think that's maybe a party that we should talk more about and engage more about those folks that are doing some really great work there too, and don't see it as an obstacle. Though that's just certainly a difficult group sometimes to work with.
Just say, and we're not done yet, but we're in the last 5 minutes of this meeting. So we gotta be good.
You can hit me.
We can take another question or two, but just keep that in mind. Do you have any closing thoughts or something that just hasn't come to the table?
My only piece, and we'll go to the question, but is I think we all can do better with this. I mean, everyone in this room probably has something that they could do. Every landowner, every municipality, every partner, we can do this a little bit better. And I think, these tools are a starting place, but you all have different insights that we can make this better. And I think we need to, because this is something that's too critical not to.
I have some land that I've put quite a bit of tile in, and that when there are major rain events, the soil's drier, it can absorb it, and it comes out of the tile over a period of a week instead of the rain event. And I just wonder if there's been much consideration of that, because on my land it makes a huge difference in reducing any flooding, and also some of the drier areas get a little more moisture from the rain events. It's a little more expensive in New York because they're stones. You can't just drill it in like you might in the Midwest, but it has a tremendous effect in reducing the rain events being serious.
So if folks didn't hear that, was a question or just a comment about the benefits of tiling on rural properties, which I can, I've seen that benefit. I think it depends where the tile is going. I think a lot of my highway colleagues would have horror stories of when it's piping out into a ditch that's overwhelmed the system that they're not used to. But in the right way, that can be a benefit. I also speak to the point that, I haven't found a lot of farmers that are looking for and even detention opportunities or creative ways to help deal with retaining water before it goes off to the system. But that's something that I love to learn more about, the design systems on farms, to think about how we can even compensate farmers to figure out spots of the farm where we can, retain that water before it gets out into the system in a maybe lower tech way than we're currently dealing with. But yeah, Brian, that's a good point for systems that farmers are already working with.
Thank you for mentioning that, and you hit on something good there with saying that, we're here talking about riparian buffers, and they are just one practice to a potentially larger solution. And floodplain storage, flood water storage is really something that absolutely needs to happen. In New York State, we've removed maybe upwards of 70% of our natural wetlands, and restoring some of those areas is definitely something that needs to happen so that we can reduce our flood flows and stormwater flows in streams.
So we talked a little bit about invasive species. We talked a little bit about planting cover mats around trees and things of that nature. And there's been a couple of slides on Japanese knotweed and how to manage those kinds of sites. Can you talk to the site maintenance, the how to implement or riparian restoration or a wetland restoration in a site where we know we've got a monoculture of, or a couple of crops that, or a couple of plants that are there, they're all invasives. How do you maintain that and get your plants on sooner so that you don't have as much exposed soil?
There was a lot to that question. I guess I would just start by saying that when you have a really noxious invasive plant such as knotweed or multiflora rose, as much as I don't like to apply herbicide, it is definitely the only weapon we have, especially on large-scale restoration projects. I recommend like a year to two of herbicide application prior to planting the species that you would like there. In between, we have hydroseeded the areas to make sure that we do get some type of cover there. But that's the only type of cover that we'll put on in between herbicide applications. And then after a couple rounds of herbicide, we plant the native plants that we want. We tube everything so that we can prepare for future herbicide applications, and we plan for maybe 3 years of herbicide applications after we plant our plants. And often that is very cumbersome because your grant funding periods might only be 2 to 3 years. So you might not be able to have sustained funding to apply that herbicide for that many years. So it's definitely cumbersome, and you need to have a funder willing to like extend the grant to accommodate invasive species management. Was there more to that question?
You covered it all.
Okay.
And I think, though, too, with invasive species, especially if you have an unstable stream, or there's bank erosion, well, where is the knotweed? And are you going to have funding at that time for some sort of treatment? And then how are you going to get across the stream if you need to get equipment over there? It's not really necessarily allowed. So, there's a lot, there's what you want to do, and then and there's reality of what you can do, and sometimes it's hard. You want to treat it before, or get rid of it before, but there's streams, it's all over streams. We've on the Carter Creek project, it was in just one small area. I had talked to Cornell Botanic Gardens about it, and we asked the contractor, could you, when you dig the trench for towing in the riprap, when you're down 6 feet or more, take that clump and put it down there and bury it, and just to at least isolate that soil. I thought about that on Salmon Creek, but where's all that fill going to go, and just getting the trucks in there, and the impact of there's a lot to consider, and each site is going to be different. So and Delaware County Soil and Water, which is very much advanced in stream work, has done work on composting the knotweed, which has been successful, but just reality of doing it is a totally different thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, the last piece I was going to say about the knotweed, it's a hell of a riparian plant. I mean, like really, you see it all. It's thriving, but as much as I actually came into this being very resistant to any sort of herbicide anywhere near the water, but that's absolutely the way that's usually dealt with. We've had some sites where we've cleared it all out. It looks like beautifully restored coming in, like, hey, we got this at bay, and it's, it creeps up, and you almost just try to boat race it with your other species to get them on top, but usually don't win that race. I mean, it's intense.
Got one last question here.
This is actually just kind of a comment about knotweed, which I live in the town of Ithaca, but sometimes I see the highway cutters go along and just take a horizontal cutting bar and cut down the knotweed. And then a storm comes, it's just like you couldn't do a better propagation technique. So I do think training in a whole watershed basis for that kind of thing is really, really important. And facilitating the people who cut it down, how do they get rid of it? You can't just go mulch it up and give it out as free mulch. Not good.
How about that panel?
Yeah, let's hear it for the panel. All right, I guess just to wrap it up, I just want to thank all the speakers, thank all the organizers, but also I think it was Lydia that made the point that we are fortunate that we have this energy in this area, that we have this turnout, that we have this level of interest, engagement, expertise in the room, not just on the panel. So I think we have a real opportunity to keep, and it's an ongoing conversation, but keep this conversation going. And I hope we do. And I think we can think about some of these bigger questions that Scott was posing about, how do we get to scale? How do we engage more partners? How do we engage the right partners? And what can we do in our roles to get that going? So anyway, thank you so much for coming. It was a great event.